Okay, in the last couple of meetings we had a talk from Bevan Marshall, who reminded us of the history of Jandakot Airport, the people that were here and the developments that took place. It brought to mind a story which I'd heard both from the person involved and from other people. So I've pieced it together, and this is pretty close to the real thing. I've decided to call the talk Adams Field. You'll probably see why at the end of the talk. There was an instructor at this Aero Club in about 1967, and that's 48 years ago. His name was Steve Adams, a popular instructor and down-to-earth operator. I did some commercial training with him. I've got to mention at the outset that Steve was a smoker, because this forms part of the story. It was Steve's habit to have puff on a cigarette before pretty well every flight. And on the day in question, he told his student to go out and pre-flight the aircraft, and he would be out in a couple of minutes. There was a minor delay in the office, and so he got out to the gate a couple of minutes later than anticipated. At the gate to the tarmac, he lit up his cigarette, had a couple of puffs, and the student signalled him and said, "I'm ready, the aircraft's been pre-flighted, let's go." So Steve decided to butt out his cigarette, but since he hadn't smoked very much of it, he took the remainder with him. He went out to the aircraft and satisfied himself that the pre-flight had been done correctly, got into the aircraft with the student and put the extinguished cigarette in the ashtray. They taxied out, and after normal checks and clearances, they were cleared for takeoff on runway 12, going out that way. And at around about 200 feet, smoke started to pour into the cockpit. Steve and his student became alarmed. Smoke and acrid fumes. So Steve, thinking out loud, said, "Well, I wonder where all that's coming from." And the student said, "It's from your cigarette." So Steve's attention was diverted to the ashtray, and of course the cigarette was well extinguished. There's nothing happening there. But the smoke increased and the acrid smell increased, to the point where the student became maybe a bit panic-stricken, pulled off the power and pulled the mixture control. And so Steve said, "Well, we can't land ahead because we've got trees and we're going to wreck things. And out to my left, there is a fire break and I could land on that." So he did a smart turn to the left and made it to the fire break. So you might see the takeoff there to where the problem developed. Action was taken. This is about 300 feet by the time they started to take action, and this was the result. The aircraft turned and touched down on the fire break. But if you look closely at that, you can see there's a steep downgrade just after the red line finishes. And so the aircraft, after floating and rolling over the fire break, entered the downgrade. The nose wheel went down at not much over walking pace, and the aircraft tipped over on its back. Steve said to the student, "Watch out how you undo your harness. People have broken their neck in similar situations. But let's get out of here as quick as we can, because we could be on fire, and I don't like the smoke." So they got out of the aircraft and stood their distance for a minute or so, examined the aircraft, and there was no smoke coming from the engine bay. So they moved in a bit closer and had a closer look at things. No sign of fire, only smoke in the cockpit. So Steve then said, "Well, someone would have seen this, there's aircraft operating off the runway, traffic arriving from the training area. they'll have seen us and someone will do something fairly soon. But nothing happened. A few more minutes went by and Steve said, well, I know the aircraft is upside down and I know that the aerial is in the sand, but I'll go into the aircraft and try the radio and maybe I can tell someone what's happened to us. So he got in the aircraft, turned on the radio, made a transmission, nothing happened. So then he said, well, if the transmission did get out, then maybe I should give it a few more minutes. So they waited more and more time. And finally, even at the top of that slope there, they had a fairly good view of the aerodrome and they couldn't see any vehicles moving or coming their way. So they said to themselves, well, 10 minutes, that's enough, we'd better start thinking about walking. Touchdown, turn over, walking down the fire break. And it was when they got to about that spot that the man in the tower looked out and thought, what are those unauthorised people doing on the centre of the aerodrome? We'd better do something about that. So he contacted the ground crew and said, listen, a couple of unauthorised people out there, would you get a vehicle out and get them off the aerodrome and find out what they've been up to? So the man in the Holden station sedan drove out and pulled up alongside him and said, okay, so what are you chaps doing out here in the middle of the aerodrome? By this time they'd been on the ground for over 20 minutes. And Steve said, well, we've come from a crashed aeroplane. And the bloke said, crashed aeroplane? Where? So they said, over there on the hill, you can just make it out. He said, my God, what happened? They said, well, we thought we had a fire. He said, oh, fire, okay. So he takes off back to the vehicle, picks up the radio and says, Tower, this is car 4. These blokes have crashed their aeroplane on the fire break over there. And the bloke in the tower picks up his binoculars and has a look out, hits the big red button. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And this alerts the fire crew. The fire crew jump into their fire truck and tender and take off with directions from the man in the tower as to where to go. They get out to the foot of this very steep slope where the star is, and they find that they've got trouble going up the slope to the aeroplane that has crashed. So it took well over half an hour for anyone to get near the aeroplane. Steve Adams told the story a number of times and made a bit of a joke of it. And what he also did was finish his comments off with this famous saying that a few people present today will remember and others up and down the aerodrome remember it. And that is that Steve's comment finally was, if you crash at Jandakot, the ants will get you before the fire. His friends who heard the story decided that they could make a bit of fun of it too. And so that steep slope, which is not as white as it is on that image, where the star is now overgrown with foliage and it's a bit green. But people still call it Adams Field. And that's why I gave this talk the title today of Adams Field. Sometimes as I'm driving along, I look out and I see that sloping piece of terrain, fire break, and I think, good on you, Steve. You were well caught. So, that's the story for today.
Just one point. What was the smoke about?
Oh, I forgot to tell you. Yeah. Someone on the staff here, before the flight, had decided to clean the aircraft and used a degreasing fluid, which they'd sprayed into the intake. It had gone into the heater duct and then followed by some water, and there was degreasing fluid plus water in a jacket which also contained the exhaust pipe. And so with the aircraft in climb, or in a climb attitude, the degreasing fluid had come in contact with the exhaust pipe, and the air passing through the duct had two choices depending on where you had the knob. The knob going one way would eject the heated air overboard, or when you pull the knob, it would deflect the hot air into the cockpit. And so the hot air had been left on, and they were getting the hot air plus the acrid smell and the smoke into the cockpit. Sorry, I forgot to mention that too. But it's a big part of the story. This is a vertical view of what happened, and that's where they got picked up as unauthorised personnel out on the aerodrome. And if the blinds were up, you'd be able to see that. That photo was taken some years ago, and it was a little bit more plain. There's also a whitish building in the background now, which takes a bit of it away. But when the blinds come up later on, you'll probably be able to see that. Thank you.